Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our Summer Coach Collab series here on Kathryn May. I'm so glad you guys have joined us. And if you're joining us for the very first time, you're just catching what's going on here. We are about to wind down our summer series. This is the second to the last episode, you guys, talking about trauma recovery. And Amy Talton is a trauma-informed life coach, and she's just going to be sharing some things with us. We're just going to be chatting it up. So hopefully you guys are going to just be here listening and learning some things, be encouraged by the time we're done. Trauma recovery is something that is really near and dear to my heart. And Amy, thank you for being here, sharing with everybody today, just what you know and what you love to learn about.
Thank you, Kathryn. I'm honored.
Trauma recovery is also really important to me because I've been through a lot of it. Like I've walked through a ton of trauma recovery in my life. And I know there's always new things that we have come up and, new issues to deal with in life, but there's some things I'm still dealing with from childhood. And I know Amy knows some of those things because she's my buddy and she's read my book that's going to be released here pretty soon, you guys, September 21st. I'm so excited and scared. Like it's coming, but I'm excited. You guys are going to get an opportunity to really hear my story. So Amy knows I've definitely had to walk through some trauma recovery, but trauma recovery can be really tough. Like dealing with trauma, it's a tough thing. And it's not everybody's most favorite. I don't think it's anyone's most favorite. I just wanted to start by asking you, Amy, if you could just share with us what exactly is a trauma-informed life coach, and then just share with us a little bit about your story and why you decided to become one in the first place.
Okay. Before we do that, can we put our hands on our chest, take a deep belly breath from your abdomen, and exhale. The reason why I do that is because this is very heavy. Whether you are a trauma survivor or not, your nervous system can kind of tense up when we start to talk about trauma. So I'm not sure, somebody may be listening and it could be very triggering to them. So just take a deep breath, just kind of relax your neck and relax your shoulders. Well, trauma informed in general is when you look at people through a different lens. Instead of labeling people, we look at them and we say, what happened to you versus what is wrong with you? Our society has used the term mental illness, which I don't think is, healthy, because there's some preconceived notions about trauma and being crazy. And so I really want to remove the stigma by helping people understand that trauma is very broad. I think we think of trauma as like the big T traumas, and that's true: abuse, neglect, loss of a loved one, but there's also smaller traumas that can affect people. It's more about an experience inside of you than it is about the actual event sometimes. Being trauma informed allows me to look at clients through a different lens and to recognize when trauma could be influencing their decisions, their patterns, if they have coping mechanisms or negative belief systems. A lot of that is due either to trauma or stress and overwhelm. So when you have trauma, you're just naturally more sensitive to stress. Trauma is held in the body. And so there's all kinds of factors, there's all kinds of things that you may be experiencing. And a lot of trauma survivors live on autopilot and they're not conscious of what's happening. And so I'm trained to be able to not diagnose, because I'm not a licensed therapist, but I'm trained to be able to recognize trauma or symptoms of shock and not re-traumatize someone. I do more of a therapeutic style of coaching where I do more inner work. I think there are different types of coaching. Mine is a little bit more therapeutic, and I use a modality called internal family systems, where I coach around, they're called parts, but it's the defense mechanisms, coping mechanisms. There's different names for them, but it's recognizing those parts of you that were developed usually from younger woundings, and then being able to show yourself compassion. That's a huge piece for any trauma survivor, but to be able to recognize all of your coping mechanisms in not a non-shaming, blaming way, and recognize that they're there for your protection. Because bringing it back to the body again, our nervous system is set up for our survival.
Yeah.
So being able to send appreciation to the way we show up, which is hard, especially when we deal with addictions or, we're stuck in these negative patterns, we can deal with that inner critic, and we can shame ourselves. And so that's huge for me, is self-compassion and self-awareness and just understanding why you do what you do. So I really do go kind of really deep. You have to really be prepared for that type of coaching.
So that's really interesting that it's different in that way, that you've kind of let us know that, hey, we're going to deal with some real stuff. Like, we're going to go there. If you work with me, or if you're one of my clients. And I know that you even walked me through a session before where I needed some help kind of going through some things, and you helped me. I have already healed from a lot of trauma, but there was this part that was stuck, and you brought such light and revelation to that, but it wasn't easy in the moment. I was like, oh, I don't like it. So it's not exactly fun work, but it's necessary work, in my opinion, in order to walk free and not be stuck in the bondage of the pain of the past and living in fear, because trauma definitely can cause a lot of fear. And I was just finding I was angry all the time. And, I just wanted to get past all that. So I knew that it was going to be hard one way or the other. I just needed to pick my hard, so healing is hard, but being stuck in it is hard too. So can you just share with us, Amy, a little bit about your story, as far as like your healing story, and why were you drawn to this specific type of life coaching?
I'm going to rewind back 14 years ago.
Okay.
My husband and I decided to adopt, and our adoption agency did not have extensive requirements for training, but we had to take some educational courses, mainly on attachment, because it was more attachment parenting, and it was very helpful, but we were very underprepared for adoption, which is trauma, by the way, because an ideal situation is for a child to remain with their biological family. And so when that doesn't happen, that's an automatic trauma. And if the child has had neglect or any abuse, you're going to see some trauma responses. But I didn't know anything about trauma. And so fast forward a couple of years, we brought our child home. In order for me to really be able to help him and help our family, I had to kind of dive deep into research. And I'm a researcher by heart. I love it. But it's also a coping mechanism for me as well. Sometimes I can overanalyze and over-research things, but that helps me learn. But it's not always healthy. But at the time, it made me feel honestly less fearful and more in control, even though I really wasn't in control. I kind of convinced myself that I was. But that's when I just started to really dive into trauma, the brain, the impacts of prenatal, postnatal trauma. Everything was geared outside of me, like to help my external situation. And I love this quote that I heard someone said, there's nothing like having children to shine a spotlight on your wounds.
Yeah. Yes.
And so that's what happened in my journey to help my outside environment and to trying to help heal what was broken. I didn't realize I was broken as well. And so I started to deal with depression, anxiety, extreme like chronic stress. If you do the Enneagram, I'm up on the body part of the Enneagram, the gut part. So I started having a lot of physical symptoms, which is kind of in line with my personality, because I tend to be critical of myself. And that's something that I never felt like I was doing enough. I wasn't doing it right. And then this cycle of trying to learn more and then feeling like I couldn't affect change in my outside world. It just really took me down to a place of burnout and fatigue, just somatic symptoms. At the time, I didn't realize it was somatic, but I was hopping around to different doctors and specialists, and it was just stress. It was like over a decade of stress. And so there's nothing like a pandemic in 2020 to kind of push my pain even further to the surface. And I finally realized, I need to do what I have not been conditioned to do, is to turn my gaze inward. I was raised in a Christian culture, and a lot of us were, where it's denial of yourself. And we take that to the extreme sometimes. And so I was not taking care of myself. I was not showing compassion to myself, and I paid the price for it. But I finally reached that point where I was like, I'm going to go get help for myself. So I started therapy. And for all those 14 years, I was already reading about trauma. I would go to conferences. It was never to turn into a vocation. There was something in the back of my mind. I felt like I was going to be able to help people. It was too overwhelming, and I was too stuck in my own pain to even have that kind of viewpoint. But there was something that always was in the back of my mind, like, this pain is going to be used for a greater purpose. So 2020 just gave me that time to be more reflective, because we were limited to what we could do. So I was home and isolated, and I was getting, personal help. But then I was like, you know what, let's use this and get certified. So I went and got like 3 or 4 different certifications, combined them together, and really just started sharing on my Instagram. Honestly, everything I share is from either I'm personally walking through, have walked through,
Mhm.
or there are people in my life that are walking through it.
I love that you just said being in relationship with that. And what you're talking about when you say that is the emotion or the situation.
Absolutely.
That's such a foreign concept to somebody. I'll just say it to me. It was such a foreign concept. And I read something on your Instagram. You share a lot about curiosity. Like, I just think, I just think it's so, I love your verbiage when you're talking about trauma recovery. Cause I'm like, what? That's so good. But something that I saw on your Instagram recently, I just thought it was really interesting. I wanted to quote it. You said, the simple questions lead to deep discovery. By increasing your emotional self knowledge, you increase your emotional maturity. And that was like, oh, yeah, that's true. And I talk a lot on this channel about self-awareness. Like I just say that, like, I'm really self-aware, or like, why am I doing this? I always ask myself why. And you might think I'm a little nuts because I talk to myself all the time, but Amy understands I'm not. Like, it's important to give yourself a minute and sit back and go, wait a minute, what's happening? Why am I doing this? Why did I respond that way? Why can't I handle my emotions right now? So how would you help someone who's carrying the scars of trauma, and sometimes deep and even complex traumas, to even want to increase their self-awareness when their emotions are so scary?
Yeah, and it makes a total sense to be disconnected from yourself, because when you've undergone trauma, whether it's childhood trauma or, like you said, complex trauma, you disconnect from yourself. It's called the fragmented self, because usually you dissociate from yourself, or you view yourself as not worthy. And so self-awareness is not your priority, survival is.
Yeah.
So it is very hard for trauma survivors to go there, but that is huge. It sounds simple, but it's not at first. That's why I love the term curiosity, because we all at our core, our God-given core, were curious. Trauma robbed that from us. That childlike curiosity is not able to be accessed for some people. You have to consciously work towards it and take very small steps. To me, one of the most important steps for trauma recovery is that to be able to be self-aware is very important. I think a lot of trauma survivors get caught in trying to access memories, and they can't always do that, especially if your trauma occurred pre-verbally, or it's stored in the part of your brain that's implicit, where it's nonverbal. But you can work in the present moment and start to look at your interactions. And there's, this big trend of mindfulness, being present,
Mhm.
meditation, and all of that. And all of that's great. It can be overwhelming for a trauma survivor to start like making a list of all the things that are recommended, but they all come from a really good place, because it is about being present. You can't be aware if you're not present. So you have to be able to stop in the moment and think, okay, why this specific situation? Why this specific person? What's coming up in me? And then that is a way to begin to acknowledge yourself, because trauma happens in relationship. And so we may not be able to always get that corrective relationship experience as an adult. That is why we can work on our relationship with ourselves. And it's the whole reparenting thing. We all deserved a primary caretaker, a parent that would attune to us and be able to look at our emotions and be able to validate what we were experiencing, be able to see us, just really see us. If we didn't feel seen, if we didn't feel secure, that is something that really affects us later on in life. And so self-awareness is a type of reparenting. You're tuning into yourself and you're giving yourself what you really needed as a child. You can do that. So that's why I love that self-awareness and self-care as well. And self-awareness is self-care, because you're not bulldozing through your life. You're actually stopping, and that's caring for yourself. That's what you would want a healthy parent to do for you.
That's really good. And I'm definitely guilty of bulldozing through life and trying to ignore all this stuff. So
Yeah.
I've come a long way to getting to the point where I'm like, now, why are you doing this? What's happening?
And it's not just trauma survivors. I mean,
Yeah.
anyone. For
Yeah.
me, I personally am very stress sensitive, and sometimes I will over busy myself
Yes.
because I just don't want to take the time, to go there.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's very common.
That's so good. That's me too. And so that's why I am such an avid journaler. And you guys have heard me talk about this. Amy, I've talked about this. And I journal because I get so busy tasking myself to death because I don't want to focus on it. I like put up the blinders and I go as full speed ahead as I can possibly get and forget about it all, but I'm really not. It's like, it's smothering me. So if I don't sit down and actually like get a journal and start writing out some things, and then I get it out of me, and then I can start to hear from God. I have to like clear the blockage, so to speak. And then I can start to even recognize why I was even doing that in the first place, So for me, in order to focus, even giving myself the time to care for me is journaling. That's how I do it. And I think that that is just a healing thing. I think it's even been proven in studies that journaling actually reduces blood pressure if you're a regular journaler. And I have hypertension for no reason, really. They've done every test in the world on me to find out why I have hypertension. Starting at the age of 27, I was diagnosed. I'm 38, almost 39 now. And I've been medicated for high blood pressure for that long. For so long, I thought something was wrong with my body. But I listened to a podcast about trauma recovery like a month ago. And this woman was talking about how people that have experienced sometimes really severe complex trauma will have high blood pressure because it's like this stored trauma in your body that you're not even aware of is there. And it's this heightened sense of constantly being on, like stress mode all the time. Fight or flight is always on. And you can't go from one state to the other. You can't get out of fight or flight and into rest mode. You can't go from that one part of your body to the next that you need to in order to chill out and rest and recover, because you're always in fight or flight mode. And that's so me. So I'm like, oh, that is why. So I'm believing that that is going to be something of the past here soon because I'm tired of taking medicine for it.
Have you ever heard of the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences?
No.
It's basically it's a score. They list the type of events that are adverse childhood experiences. So the higher your score on that test, the more likely you are to struggle with chronic health issues. It's actually been proven. So I think what you're saying is true. That hypervigilant state that does affect you. It affects me as well. I've struggled with imbalance in certain areas for a really long time because of that chronic I kind of am a hypervigilant, quote unquote paranoid person, and so that is a lot for your body to have to exist, to exist in that state for a long time.
Yes. And that's why it's been so difficult as I've been writing my story, because I feel like I have to keep pushing on the wound, keep pushing on that part of my life that was so traumatic, which was the majority of it. And I'm just trying to get through that, even though it might take somebody like you read my book to help me get through some things, to make sure it read right and did grammar stuff and all that for me. Thank you. But you plowed through that book in no time. It takes me forever to get through it every time I reread it, because I'm like, oh, I have to go here. I have to read this. I have to do that. It's just because it's hard, but it's also been very therapeutic and very healing, because there was areas where I wasn't allowing myself to go there. And then I had to go there in order to share my story with you guys, in order to share the victory at the end of it. There is victory. It's not just terrible stuff, but I really love, though, that it's okay that you're saying it's okay to feel and deal with these type of things on your own terms and in your own time. It's not something that's so easy for every, it's not just like do XYZ and get over it. Like, it's not
right
work.
Yeah, and if you're sensitive to stress, you don't want to create this big list of all of these healing strategies. You may have to pick and choose, stick with one for 30 days, and even journaling can be overwhelming to people. You don't have to journal more than just a few sentences, just to start out really, really small.
That's so good. Yeah. That's so great that you give people permission to start small also, because some people have this personality like I have, where it's like all or nothing. I have to have the list. And then when I see the list, everything in my head explodes and I'm like frozen. I can't do anything, So it's good to know that you can start small and that it's okay. So that's really awesome to know. And you guys, there's so much to know about this topic, and there's so much we could talk about trauma recovery for hours and hours. But I really want to touch base on the types of people, or the types of emotional, like ways that we handle emotion. I don't know how you would word that, but you talked about on an Instagram post that I read, I don't know, days ago, a week ago, or something like that, that I thought was really, really good. I read your story, like your little blurb under it, but I read that over and over again because you talked about 3 types of people when it comes to emotional overwhelm. Now, the word overwhelm is what caught my attention in the first place and made me stop and go, okay, no, I need to really read what she's saying right here today, because I tend to be overwhelmed all the time. And it could just be something so simple and silly, but I'm like, why is everything seems to overwhelm me? Or like you're saying, sensitive distress, I call it overwhelmed. Um, but you list out 3 different types of people when it comes to this emotional overwhelm. And it's the hyperfocuser, the represser, and the minimizer. And I thought, oh gosh, I could pick myself out, because you kind of said what those were. And I could pick myself out of those really, really quickly. And I was definitely the represser. So if you could share with everybody watching today a little bit more about these 3 types of I don't like to call them 3 types of people, but 3 types of ways to handle our emotions, right? And then if you guys are feeling brave enough that are watching right now, after she's done sharing about these 3 types and like what that means, if you're feeling brave enough, you can let me know in the comment section below which one you are. I just told you guys I'm definitely a represser, and I think I have a mixture of some of the other ones she's going to share. But if you're feeling brave, let us know. And if you could just share with us, what does that mean? What are those?
Yeah. And well, first of all, I've found myself in all 3 camps as well. I think what we have to realize before we start to look at how we handle our emotions is there's a very high likelihood that it is based on our childhood conditioning, maybe how we saw our family of origin handle emotions, and or how they parented us, what we were and were not allowed to express, or how we just saw them model emotional expression. The minimizer would be someone who really struggles with comparative suffering or emotions, where my situation is not as bad as da 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 da. And so, there's almost like a sense of guilt if, I allow myself to feel this way because, sister so and so had it much worse than me. And so
Right.
they minimize their pain, and they move on. But you can't minimize it. Minimizing is not destroying, like it's still within you. It's going to come out eventually. But that is very common for people to minimize. And then the hyper focuser is kind of the opposite of that. You maximize your overwhelm, and it's just like, oh, that's all you see. It's like an internal boundary where the overwhelm is like right here, so you don't have any distance from it. And so you do you can take the victim mentality a little bit. It's really hard for you to be empathetic towards other people because you're always sympathetic towards your own plight. And so the represser, yeah, that's someone who you can obviously, a lot, these are unconscious decisions,
Right.
first of all, but you would, say, there's too much for me going on right now. I've got too much to do. And then it's just, if you had a to-do list, your emotional overwhelm is always going to be on the bottom of the list,
Yes.
and yeah. And because I can list a million reasons why, but there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to go there. So you just that's the bulldozer. You just kind of keep pushing through and repressing them, and they will come out. Either you will have a tantrum of rage and anger, an angry outburst, or
Yes.
you will have physical somatic symptoms.
Wow,
Yeah.
I've had both with that. I just want to share with you guys really this crazy thing that happened to me recently when it comes to that, because I'm like the poster child for what you're talking about right now when it comes to that repressor, because I was doing this over the last 2 months. I've been really repressing, especially like my oldest is going off to college. I'm dealing with this publication of the book, which is a ton of work. And then I run this channel, and then I have 3 children, and I have an amazing husband, and I have all these things going on, and I'm not handling it. And then there's these outside little bitty things that are just pestering me and bothering me. And I'm trying to ignore it. And I'm going through my days, and I'm finding that I'm shorter and shorter with my family. And I'm like, just want to hurry up and get the day over with, and frustrated at everything. And finally, I just decided one night after dinner where I didn't speak to anybody because I was so frustrated, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I was just feeling so alone. I was surrounded with people, but I felt like I was all alone in my head. And I went after dinner and locked myself in this very space that you see me in right now. I grabbed my journal and my pen. I threw on some worship music on my Spotify, and it was a playlist called When You Just Need to Let It All Out and Cry. I was like, I'm not crying, but I'm just going to write this out. It wasn't even a whole half a song in, and I'm just boo-hooing, letting it all out. I was journaling. And when I was journaling, at first, it was just ranting. None of it made sense. I was just like, frustrated at everything and telling God how I felt, and really just giving him the what for about my life. And he finally just started reading my mail. And some of it was through the words of the songs that were being played. Some of it was just through him speaking straight to me. And I would just write things down. And by the end of that, I had cried so long and so hard. I mean, my eyes were swollen. It was ugly cry style. I was like laying on the floor on my face by the time I was done with it, just letting it all out, really. And man, I got up 45 minutes later and I felt the weight of the world lift off me. Like everything that was holding me down and making me feel all bunched up and crunched up and tense and angry just was gone. And I was like, oh, and he spoke to me such healing, amazing words, in that time. So the things that were going on prior to that 45 minutes didn't go away. They were still going on, but I was able to handle them better because I took time to take care of me, like what's going on up here. And I'm a certified mental health coach. I know these things in my head, but like you just said, I'm the last on the list when it comes to taking care of myself emotionally, even sometimes physically. Like I'd like to go sit down and take a bath, but there's days I'm like, I got 10 minutes. I'm showering because I'm exhausted and I'm going to bed. That's it,
Yeah.
So it is so important. And you know what, guys, the struggle is real. You are not alone. If you are going through the same stuff and you're like, oh, it's just mom burnout. Oh, it's just life. Oh, it's just something, whatever the excuse you want to say, it's just something minimized, like you just talked about. Like it is so incredibly important to take a minute or 45 and just write some stuff out, or just go somewhere quiet, like where you can scream. Sometimes just scream at the top of your lungs if you feel like that's what you need to do. Give your body permission to do what it feels it needs to do in the moment. And if you're like me, I haven't given my body permission. So that was a big deal when I took the time and just screamed one day in the car as loud as I could, that I was like, oh, that was in there, but it was freeing in the moment, so just do whatever it takes to be healthy, because it not only helps you, it helps people around you, as well. And then when you are healed, you can comfort others with the same comfort you have been comforted by. So it's just stories like Amy's, it's stories like mine, it's stories like yours that help other people recognize, hey, we're not alone. It may look different. Our stories look different, but the common thread is that we're alive on this earth and we're breathing, and we're going to experience trauma of some sort in our life at some point. Even the death of a loved one is traumatic, very traumatic. And I've experienced that too, and tried to minimize it as though I should just be okay with getting over it, when it's not true. So, like I said, there's so much I feel like we could really talk about, because I feel like this is such an important topic to touch on constantly, because I think there's a little bit of shame around it too for people.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. There's still an old paradigm that it's taboo, that it's not safe, especially in certain communities. It's not safe to talk about. And that's what I'm hoping that this conversation, will be just another way to show that we can talk about things like that, and that it's one big factor in trauma is when you can't process it until you express it.
That's good.
So just to talk about it like this. And another, you hit on this, grief is a big part of trauma, and a big part of, it's one of those uncomfortable emotions, that not just with trauma, but with any transition you're going through in your life. Those same emotions that you felt in childhood, anything where you feel like loss with what you thought your life would look like, or the loss of your situation, what it looks like is changing, or the loss of, like you said, a loved one, that is one of the most uncomfortable emotions, where we do minimize and we do repress and we do or hyper focus on it. So I think that's a collective experience that we all can identify with, really, is grief.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's sad that it's part of life, but loss
Yeah,
is part of life. And it's not just, like you said, it's not just the death of a loved one necessarily. It could be the loss of a position or job or status or
absolutely.
whatever, whatever it is. I've experienced grief in several of those areas we just talked about, for sure. You know what, guys, I know this topic is so important and we could talk about it forever, but we're going to go ahead and wrap up this. Before we do, I really want to make available to the people that are watching, how can somebody get in touch with you about possibly getting more resources about healing from trauma, or even just possibly being coached by you or taking a class or something like that? Would you just share with everybody how they can get in touch?
Sure. My Instagram is Coach Amy 510. And there's also a link in my bio that has my email address. And I'm working on a master class in the fall right now. And that's something that's upcoming that I really hope will help a lot of people.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I definitely want to be a part of that. So I'm excited. And you guys, if you do, go check out her Instagram, make sure you follow her if you're not already following her, so that you can get updates whenever she posts those. She really just shares a lot of information specifically about trauma recovery and her own stories. And she has such an amazing way with words. So you guys will really be blessed by following her on Instagram. And then while you're there, go ahead and make sure that you guys can grab this free guide to navigating your waiting seasons. And it's called How Do I Wait? And I read through it. It's really helpful. So you guys definitely go grab that. It's just a free resource that she has. Amy, thank you so much for hanging out with us today and sharing so much of your heart to just help other people heal.
Let's do it again. I had
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, this is really great. I'm so glad. You guys, please let us know in the comment section below. Let me know if this helped you. And thank Amy for being here as well. And you guys can ask her questions there, or just go straight to her Instagram and just DM her and speak straight to her. She's got a wealth of knowledge in her head. So she loves to research, and she definitely has just such a way of just being gentle with you. So I'm very grateful for that part of you, Amy. So thank you for being here. And you guys, thank you for watching. And don't forget to click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And we'll see you here again next week. Next week, we're going to be chatting about a really neat topic called accountability. So you guys are not going to want to miss that. We'll see you guys soon. Bye.